Mike McCool here. I'm in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me this morning is our delegate, Chris Collins. Glad you came in. I know you're not doing anything, and Chris is also an attorney, so his real job is kind of on hold at the moment. So
until the courts open back up, yeah.
So he had plenty of time to stop in to see us. We're going to talk to him a little bit about things that happened in Richmond and some of the bills that the governor has signed that, I don't want to say they're not, what was the word? I've already lost my word already. But, we're a strong conservative area here, and some of these are a little more to the left, so we can talk about those. Let's start at the beginning. How we see all these laws. How does all that happen? Because you see House bills, Senate bills. Some have to pass one way, some have to pass the other. Can you give us the 30,000-foot view of how kind of stuff works in Richmond?
Well, sure. So we're a bicameral legislative body. Thomas Jefferson designed us, so we have the House and the Senate side. And so if a House patron puts in a bill and a Senate patron puts in a bill, and it's for the exact same thing, we have to make them match at the end of the day. So if the House wants, we'll use decriminalization of marijuana as a good example. The House said a half an ounce, the Senate said a full ounce. And so we had to come up with a compromise.
Three-quarters of an ounce.
Three-quarter, yeah. So we had to come up with a compromise between the two, between those two bills. So you see a lot of the same ideas and seeing a lot of concepts, but the House has a different idea what should happen versus the Senate. And so a Senate bill then comes to the House, we amend it, the Senate amends their bill, and then hopefully during that 2-week process, right before we end session, a reasonable outcome for that bill happens and everyone agrees to, and we find peace in the valley.
And how does the voting work? I mean, is it 51%, 60%? We have all these different rules. I'm just curious, how does that work in Virginia?
So to pass a bill is a simple majority. So in the House, it's 51 votes, or a majority of the voting members present. Same thing in the Senate. There's 40 of them, so it takes 21 votes or a majority of those who are present. Now, if it's a revenue bill, for example, if the town of Front Royal wanted a new meals tax rate that's in excess of what the code is, that takes a 2/3 majority to vote and pass a new revenue bill.
Kind of way local as well. It requires a little higher standard.
Right.
To if you're going to start taking money out of people's pocket, they want more people to sign on.
Exactly.
More people to blame.
Right.
I think that's what it is. Anything stick out to you this particular session that kind of got on your jaw, so to speak?
So we had a lot of there was a lot this year. You
lost your majority.
We lost the majority. So the Democrats were in charge of both the House, the Senate, and the Capitol, the governor's office. So there was a lot of bills introduced, but we melted it down to a handful of issues, and a couple that were, I think one of the things on your list is some of the abortion regulations, some relaxing of some of the stuff. And as an adopted child born prior to Roe v. Wade, it's something I've always been passionate about. And it is so they removed a lot of the protections, a lot of the restrictions that we put in place on abortion in Virginia. And obviously Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land.
Sure.
Okay, abortions are legal in Virginia, just under certain circumstances. And so what they did in this instance is they took away a lot of the counseling, a lot of the, you said you were required to have an ultrasound prior to having an abortion. There was kind of a waiting period. You want to ask for abortion, you have to come back, give you a cooling off period, whereas and things of that nature. So now the way it's been, a lot of those things that we put in place to try to slow the train down a little bit have been taken away. So they've streamlined the process with these new bills.
Now, do you think that next session, after the next election and the Republicans take back over, will they try to go back and put these things back in these bills? Is that how it works? Or once the gate is closed, it's kind of hard to go backwards?
It's hard to tell. I think with the Second Amendment and the abortion stuff, when we're talking about the legislative body, I think those are the two things that I got the most emails and phone calls from constituents about.
Right.
So if the Republican, we take back control of all three. You got to take control of the governor, the House, and the Senate.
That's true, because the governor can not sign it.
Right. You take back control of the House or the Senate, the other party, excuse me, the other chamber can still prevent that legislation from passing. And of course, the governor can veto. And you have to have a 2/3 majority to override a governor's veto. So whether or not that's going to be how much we would be put back in or not would have to be a whole another conversation. And waiting to see also some of this stuff, how it's going to be implemented.
Right.
Just because we pass a law doesn't mean people are going to do it that exact way. So it'll be interesting to see when it comes to reproductive rights in Virginia, where that all plays out, and whether or not we see an increase or a decrease, or if we stay to status quo. And so time will tell.
Well, let's talk about voter ID, because that seems to be one of the governor's push. The president says a voter ID is essential to a safe election, and yet here we have people who think they're being disenfranchised in voting. I mean, we can't do anything in this country without an ID card. You can't fly, can't cash a check. I mean, think of all the things you have to have. You can't get a library card. And yet we can go vote, the most sacred thing that we have. We just show up. And, I was at the last polling, and because we talked about it, and I know some of the people on the election board, even if you don't have your ID, you can still vote. And so all these things are in there. There's no way you can not vote in the state of Virginia, whether you have an ID or not.
Right.
So, but without an ID, I mean, there is a process, to check and make sure you're a resident and all those things that have to go on. But what's the logical reasoning behind eliminating voter ID?
Well, I think that from their point of view, that a voter ID law is a voter suppression issue, where a lot of poor individuals or individuals who were incarcerated, for example, have a difficult time getting an ID because they need to have that kind of documentation, the paperwork to prove that they're who they are. But we eliminated a lot of those restrictions years ago and allowed, you can go get a voter ID card now from the registrar's office.
Right.
Okay, we don't have to go to the DMV anymore. So once again, we'll see. Pointing it from other studies and other studies in other states that have removed the ID laws, how much voter fraud happens, how much increased voting happens. I think it has. I'm not sure how much of an effect it will have.
Well, it might not have any effect, but people really get up in arms over it.
They do.
There people are passionate about their vote. But I have noticed that, every election you always hear extremes where they have a 200% voter turnout, and no one seems to be alarmed about that.
Right.
I mean, how in the world can you have a 200% voter turnout?
And then it's you start digging through, and then trying to figure out who did what with whom.
Right.
And it's it's been something that we've been dealing with for quite some time, and it's not a new issue. So we'll see what happens with the new voter ID or lack of voter ID law in Virginia.
Yeah. Now, speaking of that voting, you're going to be going back to Richmond on the 22nd of April, that's next week. And one of the things that the governor wants is to move this local May election to November. Do you think that'll go through?
Well, we're having a long conversation about that. Whether or not there's a question about whether we move it to June. He's already moved the primary date to June. Do we move the May date to June as well, or do we make everyone vote in November? So we've heard from a couple locals that are having elections in May. Some are okay, some are not okay. I think it depends on the locality and what people are used to doing. Right. But we're still having those conversations to see what's in the best interest of Virginians and whether or not where we should move that election day to.
Well, Front Royal had a May election for years, and we moved it. We petitioned to have it moved, and we went through that process thinking it would be great. And there are some advantages. We have a little larger voter turnout, but you also get sucked into these larger state and
Right.
federal elections, and sometimes you're on page 2 of the ballot, and I just wonder if maybe you kind of lose that localness by having, I make up that word, I guess.
No, I think, I think, yeah, but I think that you're right. When you have a lengthy ballot, and you're looking at town council members or board of supervisor members,
We're at the bottom.
they're at and it's a U.S. Senate race, presidential race,
Sure.
congressional races, and the media money has been spent on those races. And people are only paying attention to the top of the ticket, they're not paying attention to the bottom of the ticket. A May election is very helpful, I think, for a local for that. You're right. You're going to have a lower voter turnout. A date in May is not something that the most ardent voter usually knows what's going on, but the average voter who only comes out once or twice, every 4 years, will know about. So, like I said, we're having that conversation, and we're trying to figure out what is the best solution for those May elections, and I think we will come to a solution before Wednesday. We're going to have conference calls later on this week regarding. Everyone is kind of taking a poll of their localities that have May elections.
Sure. Because we've had a discussion here about that, and some wish we'd go back to maybe. One of the reasons we moved was because, a couple hundred votes could swing an election.
Right.
So we kind of wanted more participation instead of having, special interest groups, basically take over the town council,
Exactly.
which kind of happens from time to time. But then on the other hand, they become partisan when they went to November. Before, they were more independent,
Right.
more localized, and when they went to November, they got sucked into the political party, and I think people were really turned off about that. And so we'll see what happens. I think we might want to go back to May elections for a while. I don't know. I guess we could go back. I mean,
I think you can go back. I believe I carried that legislation movement from May to November
so
on the behest of Warren County.
exactly.
So.
I think maybe we'll have a movement. We'll go back. But it's interesting. One of the things you did on behalf of the town of Front Royal was to authorize them to form their own EDA. Just the fact that, there's a lot of things that, towns can't do. We people realize, they just think, well, if Winchester can do it, Front Royal can do it. Well, towns and cities are like day and night.
Correct. So just for some knowledge purposes, the city of Winchester is an independent city. They have their own taxing authority. They have their own. They have schools and everything else, and so they are completely separate and autonomous amongst themselves. They also have a city charter that the legislature approved and can amend, but the town of Front Royal does not have as much autonomy. They obviously have their own police force and they have a couple other things,
Sure.
but they are still beholden to Warren County as the overarching governmental agency to which they have to work with. So it was an interesting question whether or not a town could have their own economic development authority separate and apart from the county for which they sit in. So we did some legal analysis. We determined that probably they could, but there was no harm or foul into saying that they could create their own. But out of an abundance of caution, we gave a termination date of 5 years for.
So if they don't do it, it'll the sunset.
Right, and also if it gives a sunset, so someone's gonna have to come back in 5 years and either ask for it to be extended again, and hopefully the whole what's going on with the Warren County EDA and the criminal charges and the civil stuff that's going on with that will hopefully have been settled within 5 years, and that's part of the reason why we did this whole thing. And because the idea is not so much for Warren County EDA and the town of Front Royal EDA to compete against each other. It's sort of to the point where the Warren County EDA they're working very hard to bring to get themselves organized again.
Right.
And I think they're doing a very good job with that. And they've got some very good people on the new people on the EDA board and a new director on the EDA board. I have very high confidence in, but the stigma is still attached to it. So if the town of Front Royal chooses to create their own IDA, they now have that. They now have that authority.
Right. It's kind of an interesting thing that people don't understand towns, counties, why the town has to do this, and we can't do away with dilapidated buildings.
Right.
Winchester bulldozes them over, and we can't do anything.
I know.
And people are a little discouraged sometimes with those changes.
And we try to give more authority. It is interesting. We had a couple blighted property bills that have come through the legislature. And I always think about what's going on in Front Royal
Right.
with a couple things. And I usually have support of those things because I think the local community knows whether or not a building should stay or should go. I think that it shouldn't be the determination from those of us in Richmond. Sometimes I call it the eye of Mordor. We're staring out from Richmond and over. But I think that trying to give local authorities more power, more to be able to do that, and then that way they can talk to their actual constituents. They can actually talk to the people of the town Front Royal to see if they want to do something. So.
Right. Let's switch back to that Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
That was a hot topic going into the session.
It was.
We've had sanctuary Second Amendment city resolutions by I think every county in the state. I think has tried except the blue ones, but most of them, 90% anyway, seem to support that. So kind of how did all that work out? Because the governor had his pet bills he wanted, and why don't you touch on that for a minute?
So I think there was a lot of talk. There was a lot of information out there that probably was not as accurate as it could have been, being put out by all the groups.
Right.
I mean, it was just a hot button issue. As you, I'm sure you reported on, we had 22,000 or more individuals showing up on lobby day, blocking the streets, and now they were given permission to block the streets.
Sure,
I don't make it sound like they were doing that.
They weren't illegal.
No, they were not. We cordoned off. We cordoned off several blocks for that event.
And it really did go pretty smooth.
Went very smoothly.
They said there was no trash when they were done
Nope.
either. They policed themselves, and it was.
Yeah, it was fine. It was business went on as usual. They did not during that day. We didn't have any major incidents. There was a couple rabble rousers, I think, from other organizations that were trying to get something started.
Sure.
I'm sure there's a bunch of cameras running at all times, but we had no incidents. There was no acts of violence. There was no acts of vandalism. Talking to the Capitol Police, came out and gave a report that said that everything went very smoothly. Obviously, traffic and crowds.
Yeah, the locals didn't care much for
it. Right, but it was for an event of that many people on that kind of topic, with passionate people on both sides of that.
It could have been disastrous.
It could have. That bad things could have happened, and I think that the legislature body, I think both sides, Democrats, Republicans, both understood how this could go badly, and I think we all reached out to our constituents and to our bases, and said, nothing good is going to come out of a disruption or shenanigans or anything else like that. So I think it went very well.
So how do you negotiate these things?
So what we have is you saw, I don't know, I don't even know how many gun bills were.
There was a lot.
There's a lot.
But it boiled down to a handful.
Yeah. So what happens is a lot of times you have one idea for a bill. Like say universal background checks, and instead of having, usually we try to say, okay, delegate so and so, you're going to be the one carrying it. You're the most senior. You sit on that committee. But then a whole bunch of other delegates decide they want to carry something similar but different, and so all of a sudden you have 8 or 12 universal background check bills,
right,
all of which have a little nuance to them.
Right.
And so we had that kind of situation happening.
This goes into the committee.
Correct. It goes into the committee, and usually the committee chairman says, and the members of the committee say, no. You guys are great. These are all really good ideas. This is the bill we're going with, and they just take all the other bills, fold them into that one, and say this is the bill we're working on.
Yeah. Add or take away a sentence or two.
Exactly. And then they work on it. So I believe that the governor's office and Democratic leadership had a handful of bills that were of priority to them. They got those bills passed. And a lot of the other bills that were kind of floating around, some of them were confiscation bills, and some of them were other kind of limitations bills were not passed.
Right. I know one of the bills that really got under people's skin was the definition of assault weapons, where they wanted to make a magazine of 10 rounds or more. Well, the most popular gun, a Glock, holds 11.
Right.
So that was going to make everyone that holds a Glock a felon
Right.
overnight. So I don't think that one went anywhere. But
No, it made it out of the House, but the Senate the Senate did not embrace those ideas. And I think that making the definition of assault weapon is a very difficult. They were trying to find a bunch of different nuances to get it done, and I think that everyone realized that we're putting something into law that we're going to ask judges and juries to try to make a decision about.
Next to almost impossible to enforce.
Exactly.
Because in our country we are a country of compliance. We have to comply, and
Right.
that's what we depend on. We don't really depend on the enforcement.
Right.
As your real job, as you well know.
Exactly.
Let's touch real quick on this COVID-19. What's your feeling and how things are going in the state, and I don't think we'll ever return to normal. We're going to return to some degree. I think will be different. So do you have a feeling that something will be sooner than later?
So I think in Virginia, whether or not you want to call it an overreaction or early reaction, has been beneficial. I think that what we're seeing in the data right now being collected is that our infection curve is staying below what we should be doing. If we're following New York or Italy or one of those other locations, we're doing better than they were at the same point in the infection cycle. Whether or not, right now the governor sent out a June 10th date, and to try to reopen up Virginia. I think that date is a beginning of the summer vacation period. What would have been the summer vacation period for school letting out and things of that nature. Whether or not we can open up by Memorial Day weekend or something along those lines, I've had some conversations with some individuals. It's yet to be seen. I think that the idea is that in the next 2 weeks should be the peak in Virginia for the infection rate. And I know around here, I think anybody who drives around Front Royal will see that, or Winchester for that matter, will see that businesses are following these rules pretty closely. Economically, I think that this is going to be it's going to be something to dig out of. How many businesses are able to survive? I think that some of the benefits are coming from the federal government to try to prop up the economy for 2 or 3 months.
Right.
Yeah, this is different from a lot of other things. We're in a recession right now, but it's a self-imposed recession. So, and it wasn't some triggering event like a war or something like those.
Right.
Something like that. There is a, once we say, okay, we're back open for business, it's going to be interesting to see how many businesses are still able to turnkey open back up again. And I've talked to several business owners, particularly restaurant owners, who have concerns about getting their staff back and things of that nature and starting from scratch again. But I think that when the all clear is sounded sometime, hopefully in the next month or two, I think that we'll find people are ready to start engaging in business again.
I don't think it's going to be an overnight, okay, state, turn it back on. It's probably going to go, the scuttlebutt is, like Warren County has 19 cases.
Right.
Northern Virginia's got 900, whatever the number
Right.
is,
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they're going to have a little, we may open up gradually sooner than places that are heavily infected. So it'll probably be a slow, gradual step. That sounds logical.
But I want to say that I think that, and I said prior to recording that the governor's office has been very responsive to the needs. You can never know. No plan survives contact. Is an old adage I learned in the military. And I think the same thing's here. We plan, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, well, we didn't think about this, we didn't think about that.
Right.
And so trying to adjust to all of those new norms, I think that this has been a very good bipartisan effort. I think everyone recognizes that this is a little bit different. I'm glad that everyone is taking it seriously, and I have not heard of any localities not taking it seriously. I think that early on a lot of people were skeptical.
Sure.
But as they saw the numbers, particularly in New York, and now New York has revised their death numbers, and it's it's about a 3 to 5% death rate for this particular virus, where the flu is less than 1%.
Well, touch base, if you will, or if you can, I know you can, of your constitutional skills that you have. Explain a little bit. The president's taking a lot of flack over some of the comments he's made, and previous presidents, and like Katrina, Bush got beat up because he didn't act fast enough and didn't do this, and we have a thing called states' rights, and the president just can't shut down the country.
Right.
It kind of shuts down state by state by state. The governors really are the controlling issue, and it's like, my understanding is, if you want the feds to help you, you got to ask.
Correct.
And so they just don't come rolling in the door and going to be the answer to everything. And I think people have kind of a misunderstanding that they just think that the federal government is doing all this, and they're the president's pushing the buttons and pulling the strings. But touch base on that. If I'm wrong, tell me.
No, you're absolutely right. So the 10th Amendment of the Constitution says that that any powers not mentioned in the Constitution belong to the states, basically as a catch-all to say that the federal government is not an all-powerful.
Kind of like the Bible.
Exactly.
If the Bible tells you something, if you do it. If it doesn't, you're.
Yeah, it's
That's right.
So we'll use Virginia as the example. So Governor Northam has issued his own edict. Okay, he has his own executive orders that he's issued pursuant to the Emergency Powers Act that are in place in the Code of the Commonwealth. Okay. He asked for the federal government to declare us a disaster zone. The federal government did.
All 50 states.
All 50 states, which was a good move on the president's part, because that is the first step to being able to get to the FEMA, get to other resources for a disaster. So when you say, well, the federal government, what can the federal government do versus what can the state government do? Obviously, the federal government has more resources. Okay, FEMA has a plethora of things that they could do, but they aren't going to come and dictate to a governor, well, we're going to do this, this, and this, because the governor is working with its state police and its local law enforcement, local National Guard, to say, well, we don't need a new hotel, down in Abington. We need those beds over in Virginia Beach. So we know that when we do those kind of partnerships, and of course Virginia, it's not the first time Virginia's dealt with a disaster,
right?
Or dealt with the federal government when we've had to deal with other things. So it's going to be up to Governor Northam whether or not he opens up for business or not. President Trump can certainly say, "Hey, Virginia, the United States is open for business again," and Governor Northam is going to say, "Not quite yet." He could. I'm so far. I think that everybody has worked together so that we don't have confusing narratives.
Well, I think the president has said that. He said that it'll be up to the governors, and I'm talking to him every day. So
Yes.
I think, but like you said, I just want to clarify that. I don't think people paid much attention to constitutional when they were in high school. That 1 week of education you get.
Yeah, so it is it's certainly within the power of the governor of Virginia to whether or not how we do things. And as you can see, that there is a mix of different states doing different things.
Right.
We do not have a stay-at-home order, in place in Virginia. But we do have, obviously, restrictions on restaurants, barbershops, salons, social distancing of that nature. Whereas other states California, for example, have put a complete just lockdown,
right?
And have been charging and arresting people for a variety of things. Now, whether or not you can be charged with some, for example, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, the First Amendment right. Whether or not people can be charged with participating in a church service, whether or not that's constitutional or would it hold up in a court of law, that's a completely different question.
That was my next question, by the way.
It's an interesting question. That
what are we willing to give up on our rights?
Right. So obviously with emergency powers, we obviously when you've had a hurricane and you say, okay, we're going to put a curfew and we're going to put a twilight to daybreak curfew because you don't want looting. All right. We all said that's a great idea, and it may because we think it's only going to last 3 or 4 days.
Right.
We're into week 3, week 4, depending on where you are in the country right now of this. So how much longer do we give up our liberties for our own public safety? And I think that I think as Americans we recognize sometimes that there are certain things that we to do for the common good, but we're only going to do it for so long. And then it's going to be a question of how long can we suspend our constitutional rights in favor of what's going on right now.
Kind of go back to that compliance thing, our willingness to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that the majority of Virginians that I've dealt with and looked at are complying with it. And when I've had this question raised by other people, I'm like, yeah, that's a great legal question to ask. In August.
I was going to say this is something that'll come up for the next time.
Right. So this is a great essay. This is a great Supreme Court article
to
to write.
Your thesis on this one.
This is going to be a really, really neat thing to discuss in August and September.
Well, let's just mention we are a kind of like I use the example, a 3-legged stool as mankind. We are spiritual beings, and the governor just kind of like chopped one leg of the stool out from underneath people. And I know they were really a little upset, and it was kind of a blanket rule. Of course, we have this 10-person rule, but we can go out here to Walmart's an example. It's a 100,000 square foot building. They limit to 1 person per 1,000 square feet. It's 1,098 people that can be in that building at a time. So that they're counting. I said, well, how many do you have in here? I said 152. He said 151. My guess was pretty close.
Yeah.
And I said, what's the most you've had? Oh, 222 or something. So here we got, and of course they all happen to be in the 10,000 square foot section of the store, but by the code where we can have 2,000 people in there. So there's some large congregations that can seat 1,000 people and they can have 10 people. There's other congregations that 10 is half of their congregation.
Right.
So sometimes some of these rules, maybe that will be one how he starts on loosening the noose, so to speak. But I know people are really upset about this essential and not essential phrase.
That was confusing.
We can have abortions, but we can't have
so you had the essential, non-essential, and it was define that, and no one really didn't have a good. I'm sure it's just like a lot of things. I know it when I see it.
Exactly.
I know you're essential, but you're not essential, and I don't ask me why. I know
exactly.
that. But and I think the governor's done a pretty good job of saying and following up orders. There's not as everything can be more detailed. As a lawyer in me, I'm like, okay, well, that means I can do this?
Yeah, right. That's it. Let's clarify that. I know the Attorney General's put out some rulings, and which sounds pretty good, but, for instance, the operation of government. Congressman Klein has come out and says, Order 5355 does not preclude the government from having these May elections. He said that's an operation of government, and that you can operation of media.
Correct.
So that's not hindered, but yet they want to move them, or they want to stop them, or they want to have electronic meeting, even though the Attorney General says you can't use this emergency to hide behind electronic meetings and not have the public involved. Operation of government but yet our local governments have pretty much tightened it down so tight. We're hiding behind these electronic. They're trying to still function, and their intentions are honorable. But I think that people are only going to put up with that again for so long. And they're going to say, "Well, I think we've gone a little extreme on some of these areas."
I think if we get to June, and there's some sort of extension at that point, I think everyone, from my conversations with a lot of people in the public, they are annoyed, they are frustrated, they are worried, all the different emotions that go with what this kind of thing. But I think they all have June 10th is kind of
Okay, you give us a date.
There's
we're
a
gonna,
date.
We're going to hold
right?
you. Yeah.
I'm going to be released on June 10th.
Yeah, it's not so far in the future. It's okay. I can maybe last that.
I can maybe get to there.
Yeah.
But if there's an extension past June 10th, I think there's going to be a much larger, deeper conversation. I think people are going to have about freedom of movement, freedom of what can we do, what can't we do, and I think, and if the virus has gotten that bad that we need to continue to shut down, then there's going to be a whole another level of conversation. And I'll say that I think that from the Trump's administration, with the people he's got looking at their data, I have a sister. I have my sister and my wife both in healthcare. And I think the work that's being done right now, we're working very diligently on this. We're not just hoping this burns out. We're actually aggressively trying to find an offense to this attack. And not just defense.
It's like we're just slowing the growth, so to speak. It's like trying to grow your garden. If you limit the water, you're not going to have much of a crop. So
right.
It's maybe people are saying, well, it's not whether I'm going to get it; it's just when I get it.
Right. Well, I will tell you that I think one of the other things, and I try to tell people about this with the churches and the religion. So New York, of course, was just a firestorm up there. The virus went through there. And they believe that's because just the nature of the beast of New York. They're crammed together. They're all riding the subways.
14 million people in a
exactly. Everyone was rubbing up against each other in a subway and on the street. And then the other thing we know is that if you have a large congregation, and in that large congregation are 65-plus-year-olds, that you've now significantly exposed those individuals to that virus. And as we all know in a church, that
sure.
it's a large percentage. There's several nursing homes in the area, one of which my parents live in, that are completely locked down. My parents aren't even allowed to communicate with. They're allowed to communicate with each other, not allowed to see each other,
right?
Because they recognize how dangerous this virus is in that community.
We had one nursing home had like 32 cases out of 70 or something. Right. Once it starts, it don't take but a second to spread.
This is it's a very difficult virus to kill. It lasts a lot longer on a surface than the average flu virus. So all the research is showing us that sneezing, it stays airborne longer. So it is this is a serious event, and I'm glad people are taking it seriously and not just scoffing at it. I think at the beginning people were scoffing at it. It's just another flu season.
Right.
But then once they started saying, oh wait, this is something serious, and it's been a drain on resources, especially in the healthcare system.
Well, a lot has happened, and I do appreciate you coming in and talk to us. After the 22nd, next week, maybe the week or so after that, when you, depending on how long you stay, which you really don't know, it's kind of open-ended, isn't it? So when the ink dries and the things change, we'll get together again and kind of, as we get close to that June 10th date, and you get some inside information that you're willing to share with.
Sure. If I learn anything else, I'll let you know.
Well, it's kind of like I tell the doctors, how come doctors never get sick? And they do, but we, they got this magic medicine they take.
My wife does the same thing. She, if I'm sick, my wife's like, what have you not taken?
Exactly.
Oh my God. So excellent.
So, but again, appreciate you coming in. Chris is our delegate here for, I call North Warren. Mm-hmm. We have 3 delegates. We're lucky. We got 3 people to blame.
You got 3 people to carry all your water for you.
Well, it's
and one great senator.
Well, yes, that's true. And I'm wondering the redistricting. I read something that's supposed to happen, and now, maybe it's not going to happen the way it was, and.
We shall see what happens there. There's a constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot in November.
Well, that'll be interesting we'll talk about. Anyway, so we have a lot of stuff to talk about.
Lots of stuff.
After this next session that you're going back to.
Sure.
And I appreciate, maybe we can get your 2 partners to come with you maybe, but they don't like to come into this part of Warren County. They let you handle it.
They just, it's fine.
It's good. They've supported our county quite well, and it's good. We got.
Well, you've got a good team. We all work very well together. Mike, Todd, and I are all good friends, and we hang out together after session, during session.
Right.
So we communicate, and same thing with Senator Obenshane. He's all 4 of us work very closely together, and we share information. problems and discuss what's going on in the community.
Well, again, I appreciate you coming, and thank your wife for letting you out of the house
Yeah.
today. All right. Thanks again, Chris. Appreciate
Thank you very much.